The screaming started before dawn. Wren Calloway sat up on her thin straw mattress, heart slamming against her ribs, as the sound tore through the stone halls of the Blackthorn Fortress. It was not a human scream. It was something deeper, something that rattled the shutters and made the candle beside her bed gutter out on its own. She had heard that sound only once before, 3 years ago, on the night the old beast handler lost 2 fingers and half his mind. Everyone in the pack knew what it meant. The king was awake, and the king was not himself. Wren pulled her healer's satchel from beneath her bed out of habit, though she had no business going anywhere near the East Tower. That was where they kept him. That was where the guards stood with spears they never used, because spears did nothing against a creature that could tear through iron like wet paper. She was 17 when she first saw the beast from a distance, chained in the training yard for the elders to examine. She remembered the size of it, larger than any wolf had a right to be, with fur the color of burnt charcoal and eyes that glowed an unnatural amber even in daylight. She remembered how every single guard in that yard had taken one step back at the same moment, as if their bodies knew something their minds refused to admit. That was 5 years ago. Since then, the beast had only grown more dangerous, and King Cale Ashgrove had grown more distant, more silent, more alone. Wren pulled on her boots and walked to her small window. Below, torches moved along the fortress walls in a hurried pattern, the guards forming a loose perimeter around the East Tower. She could see Elder Garrick barking orders, his gray beard catching the torchlight as he pointed toward the healer's quarters. Toward her quarters. A fist pounded on her door moments later. "Wren, open up now." She recognized the voice. Finch, one of the younger guards, barely older than her, his face pale even in the dim hallway light when she opened the door. "The beat," Finch said, breathless. "He's torn into old Talia's arm. She can't stop the bleeding. The king's healer collapsed from shock and nobody else will go near that door." Wren blinked. "Nobody?" "You know how the pack is. They'd rather let her bleed than face him." Finch's eyes darted down the hallway as if the beast might appear right there. "Elder Garrick is asking for you. Says you're the only one steady enough." Wren's stomach turned to ice. She was a healer's apprentice, nothing more. She had bandaged scraped knees and set broken fingers. She had never once been trained to walk into a chamber that held a creature capable of killing a grown man in seconds. But Talia had taught her everything she knew about herbs and stitching wounds. Talia had fed her when she was an orphan with nothing, had let her sleep by the fire when the winter nights were too cold to survive alone. She owed that woman more than she could ever repay. "Take me there," Wren said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. The walk to the East Tower felt endless. Every guard they passed looked at her the way people look at someone walking toward their own funeral. A few even opened their mouths as if to warn her back, but no words came. What was there to say that she didn't already know? When they reached the heavy iron door, Elder Garrick was pacing outside, his weathered face pulled tight with worry. "You don't have to do this," he said the moment he saw her. "There is no shame in refusing. Is Talia still breathing?" Garrick hesitated. "For now. Then I'm going in." Garrick studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. The beast has been calm since he attacked her. That's the strange part. He hasn't moved from the corner of the room. It's as if... He stopped himself, shaking his head. "Never mind. Be careful. If he so much as growls, you run. Do you understand me? You don't try to be brave. You run." Wren nodded, though her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The guards lifted the heavy bar across the door. It groaned open, revealing a large stone chamber lit by a single hanging lantern. The air inside smelled of blood, and something wild, something ancient, like a forest after a storm. In the far corner, old Talia lay slumped against the wall, her arm wrapped clumsily in torn cloth, already soaked through with dark red. Her eyes fluttered open when she saw Wren, relief flooding her pale face. "Wren," she whispered, "you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you, apparently, arguing with a beast twice your size," Wren said, forcing lightness into her voice as she rushed to kneel beside her. That was when she felt it, a presence, heavy and watching, from the shadows across the room. She turned her head slowly. There he was. The beast sat crouched in the darkest corner of the chamber, massive shoulders hunched, chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. His fur, she noticed now that she was close, was not simply charcoal black. It held threads of deep silver that caught the lantern light like moonlight on water. His amber eyes were fixed directly on her, unblinking, and there was something in them that did not match the stories at all. There was no fury there, no madness, only a strange, aching stillness, as if he was holding himself back with every ounce of will he had left. "Wren," Talia's voice trembled with pain and warning. Don't look at him, just help me. Ren tore her gaze away and focused on the wound. It was deep, a long gash along the forearm, though thankfully it had missed the major vessels. She worked quickly, cleaning the wound with trembling hands, applying pressure, reaching for the herbs in her satchel to slow the bleeding and dull the pain. The entire time, she could feel those amber eyes on her. He hasn't moved, Talia whispered. Since it happened, he just stopped, backed away like he was disgusted with himself. Ren risked another glance at the beast. He had lowered his massive head slightly, and there, in his posture, in the way his ears had folded back, she saw something she never expected to see in a monster. Shame. She finished binding Talia's arm and helped the older woman to her feet, guiding her carefully toward the door where 2 guards rushed in to take her the rest of the way to the healing hall. Ren straightened, brushing blood from her hands onto her apron, and found herself alone in the chamber with the beast for the first time. She should have left immediately. Every instinct screamed at her to walk out that door and never think about those eyes again. Instead, she took a slow step toward him. Ren, don't. Garrick's voice roared from the doorway, but she held up a hand without turning, and somehow he stopped, frozen along with everyone else watching from the hall. The beast's ears pricked forward, his muscles tensed, coiled like a spring, ready to either flee or strike. She couldn't tell which, but he did not move. I'm not afraid of you, Ren said quietly, though her heart hammered so hard she was certain he could hear it. Well, that's a lie. I'm terrified. But Talia says you didn't mean to hurt her. Not really. She says you stopped yourself. The beast's amber eyes flickered, something like surprise crossing them. Ren took another step closer, close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his massive body, could see every individual hair along his powerful neck. I have willow bark and clean water, she said, holding up her satchel with a shaking hand. For your paw. I saw it's bleeding too, from the chains, I think. She wasn't sure why she said it. Perhaps it was the exhaustion, or the strange calm that had settled over the room, or simply the fact that nobody else had ever tried speaking to him like he was something other than a monster to be feared and chained. The beast watched her for a long, long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he extended one massive paw toward her, revealing a raw wound along the pad where the iron cuff had rubbed the skin raw. Every guard in the hallway gasped. Someone whispered a prayer. Garrick's hand flew to the hilt of his sword. Ren did not move away. She knelt down, right there on the cold stone floor, in front of the most feared creature in the entire kingdom, and gently took his enormous paw in her small hands. The beast went utterly still. She worked carefully, cleaning the wound with practiced hands despite the tremor she couldn't quite hide, wrapping it in soft cloth soaked with healing herbs. The whole time, the beast did not so much as flinch, did not growl, did not pull away. He simply watched her with those strange amber eyes, as if he could not quite believe what was happening either. When she finished, she looked up into his face, and for one impossible heartbeat, she could have sworn something in those eyes looked almost grateful. There, she said softly. That should feel better by morning. She rose to her feet, gathered her satchel, and walked toward the door on legs that felt like water. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The guards parted for her like she was something sacred or something cursed. She genuinely couldn't tell which from the looks on their faces. Only when the heavy door groaned shut behind her did Garrick finally find his voice. Do you understand what you just did? He breathed, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. Nobody touches him. Nobody. 5 years, and he has never once let a hand near him without drawing blood. Ren looked back at the closed iron door, her fingers still tingling from where they had touched that impossibly warm fur. Maybe, she said slowly. Nobody ever tried asking him nicely. Garrick did not laugh. He looked, instead, deeply troubled, his eyes flicking between her and the door, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense. You should go rest, he finally said. And Ren, tell no one what happened in there. Not tonight. Let me think on this. But by morning, it did not matter what he wanted. Word had already spread through every corridor of Blackthorn Fortress, like wildfire through dry grass. The healer's apprentice, the orphan girl with no wolf of her own, had walked into the beast chamber and walked out alive, untouched, having laid her bare hands upon him without so much as a scratch to show for it. By the time the sun had fully risen, everyone in the pack knew her name. And somewhere in the east tower, behind a door of solid iron, a creature that had not felt anything gentle in 5 long years sat awake long after she had gone, staring at the careful bandage wrapped around his paw, and wondering, for the first time in longer than he could remember, what it might feel like to be looked at without fear. 3 days passed before Ren was summoned again, and this time the message did not come from a frightened guard pounding on her door before dawn. It came from Elder Garrick himself, delivered with a formality that made her stomach twist with unease. "The king wishes to see you," he said, standing stiffly in the doorway of the healing hall where she had been grinding herbs into paste. Not the beast, the king. In his study, at midday. Ren nearly dropped her mortar. In 5 years, King Cale Ashgrove had never once summoned her, or any lowly apprentice, to his private study. He was a name spoken with reverence and fear throughout Blackthorn territory, a man who ruled from behind closed doors, who attended council meetings only when absolutely necessary, and who had not smiled in public since before Ren had even joined the healing hall. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "That," Garrick said carefully, "remains to be seen." The walk to the king's study took her through parts of the fortress she had never seen before, past tapestries depicting the founding of the Blackthorn Pack, past portraits of long-dead alphas with proud, fierce eyes. The higher she climbed, the quieter the halls became, until the only sound was her own footsteps echoing off polished stone. 2 guards stood outside a set of dark wooden doors carved with the pack's crest, a wolf howling beneath a crown of thorns. They opened the doors without a word as she approached, and Ren stepped into a room unlike anything she had ever seen. Shelves lined every wall, packed with books and scrolls and strange artifacts collected from distant lands. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to roast a full boar, and behind a heavy oak desk sat a man she had only ever glimpsed from a distance during pack gatherings. King Cale Ashgrove was younger than she expected, perhaps 30 at most, though something in the set of his shoulders and the weariness around his eyes made him seem far older. His dark hair was cropped close, his jaw shadowed with days of stubble, and his eyes, when they lifted to meet hers, were a striking shade of amber gold that sent an immediate jolt of recognition through her chest. She knew those eyes. She had stared into them 3 nights ago, kneeling on a cold stone floor with a wounded paw cradled in her hands. But that was impossible. Surely that was simply a trick of memory, a coincidence of color. Nobody had ever suggested, in all the stories and warnings whispered through the fortress halls, that the king and the beast might share more than a title and a lineage. "You may leave us," Cale said to the guards, his voice low and measured. They hesitated only a moment before withdrawing, closing the heavy doors behind them with a soft click. Ren stood awkwardly near the entrance, unsure whether to bow, whether to speak, whether to simply wait to be addressed. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. "Sit," Cale finally said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Please." She sat, spine straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. Cale studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes tracing over her face as though searching for something. "You are the healer's apprentice." "Ren Calloway." "Yes, my king." "You tended to Talia's wounds 3 nights past." "Yes." "And you also tended to another wound that night, one belonging to something considerably less human." Ren's breath caught. She had expected questions, perhaps a reprimand for recklessness, perhaps even punishment for daring to touch a creature everyone else feared. She had not expected the king to know such precise details of what happened behind that iron door. "I did," she admitted carefully. "I hope I did not overstep. Elder Garrick advised me to say nothing, but if he has already informed you—" "He did not need to inform me," Cale said quietly, and something in his tone made the fire in the hearth seem suddenly much colder. "I remember it myself." The room seemed to tilt slightly around her. "My king, I don't understand." Cale rose from his desk and walked slowly to the window overlooking the training yard below, his back to her, shoulders tense beneath his dark tunic. "What do you know of the curse upon my bloodline, Ren Calloway?" "Only what everyone knows. That the alpha line of Blackthorn carries a beast form more violent, more uncontrollable than any ordinary wolf shift. That it has plagued your family for generations. That is the story we allow the pack to believe," Cale said. "It is easier than the truth." He turned back to face her, and in the firelight, she saw exhaustion carved so deep into his features that it looked almost like physical pain. "The beast you tended 3 nights ago was not some separate creature kept in that tower for safekeeping. There is no separate creature at all. When the change comes upon me, whether by the pull of the moon or by rage or grief too large to contain, I become that, fully, completely. And when I return to myself afterward, I remember everything I did while wearing that shape." Ren's mouth had gone dry. "You remember attacking Talia." "I remember watching myself do it, as though from a great distance, unable to stop my own claws." His jaw tightened. "It is the great shame of my life, one I have carried alone for 5 years. Ever since the shift first grew beyond my control, I have injured guards. I have destroyed rooms. I have terrified an entire pack that depends on me for protection, and I have been powerless to explain why, because to explain it would mean admitting that their king cannot govern even his own body. Ren sat in stunned silence, pieces rearranging themselves in her mind. The strange stillness she had seen, the shame in those amber eyes, the way the wounded paw had been offered to her without hesitation, as though some part of him recognized kindness when it was offered, and could not bear to reject it. "That is why you called me here," she said slowly. "Not to punish me." "I called you here," Kale said, "because in 5 years, guards trained for combat, elders steeped in ancient remedies, healers far more skilled than you claim to be, have all tried and failed to calm what I become. Weapons do nothing, chains barely hold. And you, an apprentice with no wolf of your own, walked into that room and knelt down beside me as though I were nothing more than an injured animal in need of gentle hands." "You are not an animal," Ren said before she could stop herself. Kale's amber eyes flickered with something raw and startled. "Careful, Ren Calloway. Most of my pack would disagree with you rather firmly. Most of your pack has never looked closely enough to see anything but their own fear reflected back at them," Ren replied, and immediately clasped a hand over her own mouth, horrified at her boldness. But Kale did not look angry. If anything, the corner of his mouth twitched upward for just a moment, the ghost of an expression that might, on another man, on another day, have become a smile. "I would like to propose something," he said, returning to his desk and sitting heavily in his chair. The pack's official beast handler suffered a breakdown after witnessing what happened to Talia. He has requested to be relieved of his duties permanently, and frankly, I do not blame him. I need someone new, someone willing to be near me during the shift, to tend to whatever injuries occur, to help me manage what I cannot manage alone. "You want me to be your beast handler?" "I want you to consider it," Kale corrected gently. "It is dangerous work, Ren. I will not pretend otherwise. Even with the calm you showed 3 nights ago, there is no guarantee it will hold every time. The shift does not always come with warning, and my control during it is far from perfect." Ren thought of Talia's torn arm, of the guards who flinched at the mere mention of the East Tower, of the strange, fragile trust that had passed between herself and the creature in that cold stone chamber. She thought too of the loneliness she now understood lived behind those amber eyes, a loneliness she recognized in her own chest, having grown up an orphan with no pack of her own to claim her. "I'll do it," she said. Kale studied her for a long moment, as though searching for hesitation, for regret, for the fear that surely must be hiding somewhere beneath her calm exterior. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "Then it is settled. You will report to the East Tower each evening beginning tomorrow, to prepare the chamber and to remain nearby during the hours when the shift is most likely to occur. Elder Garrick will see to your new quarters and your new title." "And you?" Ren asked before she could think better of it. "Will I see you as well? Or only the other part of you?" Something shifted in Kale's expression, something guarded and uncertain, as though the question had caught him off guard. "That," he said quietly, "will depend a great deal on you, Ren Calloway. Most people who learn what I truly am find they cannot look at me the same way afterward. They see the king, and beneath him always, they see the danger waiting." Ren rose from her chair, smoothing her apron, meeting his amber gaze steadily. "I already met that side of you, my king. He let me bandage his paw without so much as a growl. I find I'm not nearly as frightened as everyone else seems to be." She left him sitting there in the firelight, and though she could not see his face as she closed the heavy doors behind her, she thought she heard, just faintly, the sound of a long breath being released, as though some enormous weight had shifted, just slightly, for the first time in 5 long years. The new quarters Elder Garrick arranged for Ren were nothing like her old cot in the healing hall. She now had a small room in the East Tower itself, close enough to reach the chamber within moments, furnished simply but comfortably with a proper bed, a writing desk, and a window that looked out over the dark line of forest surrounding Blackthorn territory. It felt strange to sleep so close to the place everyone else in the fortress avoided like a plague, but strangely, Ren found she slept better there than she ever had before. Her days quickly fell into a rhythm. Each morning she would study under Talia, who had recovered enough to teach again, though her arm would carry a scar for the rest of her days. Each afternoon she would gather herbs and supplies, preparing salves and bandages for whatever the evening might bring. And each evening, as the sun sank behind the tree line, she would make her way to the East Tower to wait. Not every night brought the shift. Kale had explained, during their brief, careful conversations, that the change came upon him unpredictably now, sometimes triggered by the pull of the full moon, sometimes by anger, sometimes by grief so sudden and sharp it seemed to tear itself free from his chest without warning. On the nights when nothing happened, Ren would simply sit outside the heavy door with a book or a bit of needlework, listening to the quiet, grateful for the peace, even as she remained braced for it to shatter at any moment. On the nights when the shift did come, she learned quickly how to read the signs, a low growl building somewhere deep in his chest, the way his amber eyes would flicker, gold bleeding brighter at the edges, the tension that gathered in his shoulders like a storm cloud thickening before it broke. She learned to step back at just the right moment, to give him space, and then, once the change had fully taken hold and the massive creature stood trembling in the center of the stone chamber, she learned to approach slowly, speaking in a low, even voice, the same tone she might use to calm a frightened animal caught in a hunter's trap. It worked, more often than not perfectly. There were nights when the beast paced the chamber for hours, snapping at shadows, unreachable no matter what she said or did. But there were also nights when he would simply sink down onto the stone floor at the sound of her voice, resting his enormous head near her feet, as though her presence alone was enough to quiet whatever storm raged inside him. It was during one of these quieter nights, nearly 3 weeks into her new role, that Ren first noticed something had shifted, not in the beast, but in herself. She sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, her back against the wall, watching the great creature breathe slow and even beside her. Moonlight spilled through the single high window, catching the silver threads woven through his dark fur, making them glow faintly like captured starlight. "You know," she said quietly, more to fill the silence than anything else, "I used to think the stories about you were exaggerated. Guards love to make things sound worse than they are, especially after a long watch with nothing else to talk about." The beast's ear twitched toward her, though his eyes remained closed. "But you're not what they described at all," she continued. "They said you were mindless, furious, a monster with no thought behind its eyes. But you listen. You understand every word I say, don't you?" A low rumble sounded in his chest, not quite a growl, more like an acknowledgement. "I thought so." Ren allowed herself a small smile. "I wonder what that's like. Trapped in a shape everyone fears, unable to tell them you're still in there somewhere." The beast lifted his massive head then, turning those amber eyes toward her with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was something almost pleading in that gaze, something desperate to be understood, and Ren felt a pang of sympathy so sharp it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "I understand loneliness too, you know," she said softly. "Growing up without a pack, without parents, everyone in the fortress treating you like something slightly separate from themselves, even when they mean well. I know what it's like to feel like the space between yourself and everyone else is too wide to ever properly cross." The beast shifted closer, closing the distance between them until his great head rested gently against her knee. Ren froze for a moment, startled by the sudden warmth and weight of him, before slowly, carefully, she lifted a hand and let it rest against the thick fur behind his ear. He did not pull away. If anything, he leaned into her touch, a low sound rumbling through his chest that could only be described as contentment. They stayed like that for a long while, the two of them, silent in the moonlit chamber, until eventually Ren felt her eyes growing heavy, lulled by the steady rhythm of his breathing and the strange, unexpected comfort of his presence. She woke sometime before dawn to find herself curled against the stone wall, a blanket she did not remember bringing draped carefully over her shoulders. The beast was gone, and in his place, seated across the chamber with his back against the far wall, knees drawn up, was Kale, fully human once more, watching her with an expression she could not quite name. "Good morning," she said, sitting up and pushing hair from her face, feeling suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. "You fell asleep," Kale said. His voice was rough, the way it always was after a shift, as though it took time to remember how to speak with a human tongue again. "I did not want to wake you. You looked peaceful. You covered me with a blanket. It seemed the least I could do, given that you spend your nights guarding a man who spends half of them as something considerably less pleasant to be near." Ren studied him carefully. There was a rawness in his expression this morning that she had not seen before, a vulnerability that made him look younger, less like the distant king everyone whispered about, and more like simply a man who had been carrying too heavy a burden for far too long. "You remember last night," she said. "What I told you, about feeling separate from everyone?" Kale nodded slowly. "I remember everything, Ren. Every word, every touch, every moment of every shift since the very first one, 5 years ago. It is, perhaps, the cruelest part of this curse. I am never permitted the mercy of forgetting." "Then you know I meant what I said, about understanding what it feels like to be alone in a room full of people." "I know." Something flickered across his face, something careful and searching. It has been a long time since anyone spoke to me the way you spoke to him last night. Most people who address the king choose their words with great care, weighing every syllable for how it might be received. You spoke to him as though he were simply someone worth speaking to honestly. He is someone worth speaking to honestly, Ren said. Whether he wears fur or skin doesn't change that. Kale rose slowly to his feet, and for a moment, standing there in the pale gray light before dawn, exhausted and rumpled and entirely without the careful mask he usually wore, he looked achingly human, achingly ordinary, achingly like someone Ren found she wanted very much to know better. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for staying, for not running the moment you learned the truth of what I am." "You forget," Ren said, gathering her things and rising to meet his gaze evenly. "I already touched the truth of what you are, that very first night. Chains and iron doors never frightened me nearly as much as they seem to frighten everyone else. I imagine that will not change simply because I now know your human name as well." Kale watched her walk toward the door, and just before she stepped through it, he spoke again, softer this time, almost hesitant. "Ren." She turned. "Would you consider staying a while longer some mornings, not out of duty, simply to talk, as you did last night?" Something warm bloomed in her chest at the request. Something she was not entirely certain she should allow herself to feel toward the King of Blackthorn, cursed or otherwise. "I would like that," she said, and left him standing there in the growing light, unaware that far away, in territories that had not forgotten the ancient grudges of the past, whispers were already beginning to stir about the healer's apprentice who had tamed what no one else could touch. Word travels fast within the walls of a fortress, and word about Ren Calloway traveled faster than most. Within a month of taking up her new role, she could not walk through the market square without feeling eyes follow her, could not sit in the dining hall without conversations dropping to whispers as she passed. Some looked at her with something close to awe, as though she had accomplished a miracle worthy of legend. Others looked at her with open suspicion, their eyes narrowed, their mouths pressed into thin, disapproving lines. It was Elder Marin who finally confronted her directly, cornering Ren one afternoon in the herb garden behind the healing hall, her sharp eyes missing nothing as she watched the younger woman work. "You should be careful," Marin said without preamble. "How close you allow yourself to grow to him." Ren did not look up from the lavender she was trimming. "I don't believe I understand what you mean, Elder." "I think you understand perfectly well." Marin's voice was not unkind, but it carried a weight of warning that made Ren's hands still. "No one has ever calmed that creature the way you have, not once in 5 years. There are those among the council who whisper it is not natural, that perhaps you have some manner of enchantment about you, learned from herbs and roots that ordinary healers do not touch." "I have no enchantment," Ren said, finally meeting the elder's gaze steadily. "I have patience, and I have kindness, neither of which seems to have been offered to him before. Kindness is not always safe, child, especially not towards something that has killed before and may kill again." "He has never hurt me." "Yet," Marin said quietly, and the single word hung heavy in the warm afternoon air. Ren returned to her trimming, though her hands trembled slightly now with something between anger and fear. She understood the elder's concern, understood the fear that lived in the bones of everyone who had witnessed what the beast could do, but she also knew, with a certainty that surprised her by its depth, that the elder was wrong about him, wrong in a way that mattered more than any council whisper ever could. That evening, as she made her way to the east tower for her nightly watch, she found Kale waiting for her outside the chamber door instead of within it, dressed simply, his expression troubled. "You've heard the talk," he said without greeting, falling into step beside her as she walked. "Elder Marin cornered me in the garden this afternoon." Kale's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry. I should have expected this. The pack has feared what I become for so long that any change to that fear, even a change for the better, unsettles them deeply." "I'm not asking you to apologize for their fear," Ren said. "It isn't yours to carry, not entirely." "Isn't it?" Kale stopped walking, turning to face her fully in the dim torchlight of the corridor. "You have taken on considerable risk to your reputation, perhaps even your safety, simply by standing close to me. The council whispers of enchantment because they cannot fathom any other explanation for why you alone are spared what everyone else has suffered, if they decide you pose some manner of threat. Do I look threatening to you?" Ren asked, arching an eyebrow, trying to lighten the heaviness that had settled over him. The corner of Kale's mouth twitched, though the worry did not fully leave his eyes. "You look, Ren Calloway, like someone who has walked into more danger in the past month than most guards face in a full year of service, and who seems entirely unbothered by that fact." Perhaps I've simply grown fond of the company, she said, and immediately wished she could take the words back, feeling heat rush to her cheeks at how easily they had slipped free. But Cale did not laugh, did not tease her for the admission. Instead, something in his expression softened, grew quieter, more searching. Have you, he said, not quite a question, not quite a statement. Ren swallowed hard, holding his gaze despite every instinct urging her to look away. I have found, she said carefully, that the hours I spend in that chamber, whether beside the creature or beside you, have become the hours I look forward to most in any given day. I did not expect that when Elder Garrick first summoned me. I'm not certain what to make of it now. Cale was quiet for a long moment, the torchlight flickering shadows across his features, before he finally spoke again, his voice lower than she had ever heard it. I have ruled this pack for 5 years, under the weight of a curse I could not explain to anyone, watching every person around me flinch at my approach, wondering always what darkness they saw lurking beneath my skin. I had resigned myself, long ago, to the belief that no one would ever look at me the way you have looked at me these past weeks, without fear, without calculation, simply looking at me, as though I were worth looking at. You are worth looking at, Ren said softly. Something shifted in the air between them, charged and fragile, and for a moment Ren thought Cale might reach for her, might close the small distance still separating them in the dim corridor. But instead he stepped back, running a hand through his dark hair, exhaling slowly. I should not be having this conversation with you, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. You work in my service. Anything that develops between us carries complications neither of us may be prepared to face. I'm not afraid of complications, Ren said. I've spent my whole life navigating them. Being an orphan in a pack fortress teaches you that fear of complication rarely stops anything worth having from happening eventually anyway. Cale studied her for a long moment, something warm and cautious kindling behind his amber eyes. You are unlike anyone I have known, Ren Calloway. So I've been told, usually by elders warning me to be more careful. That, finally, drew a real laugh from him, low and surprised, as though the sound itself had grown rusty from disuse. It transformed his entire face, softening the weary lines around his eyes, and Ren found herself smiling in return, struck by how much she wanted to hear that sound again. They resumed their walk toward the chamber, and that night, when the shift came upon him just past midnight, Ren noticed something different in the way the great creature moved toward her, something gentler, more familiar, as though whatever bond had been growing between the man and herself carried through even into his other shape. She spent the following weeks growing steadily closer to both halves of him, learning the particular quiet Cale preferred in the mornings after a difficult shift, learning which herbs soothed the beast most effectively when his temper ran hot, learning the small unconscious habits that belonged distinctly to the man rather than the creature, like the way he tapped 2 fingers against his knee when deep in thought, or the way his expression grew distant whenever the topic of his parents arose. She did not yet know the full history of the curse that bound him, only that it stretched back generations, tangled somehow in an old grievance between packs that predated even his grandfather's rule. But she found she did not need to know every detail immediately. It was enough, for now, to sit beside him in the quiet hours before dawn, sharing small pieces of themselves, building something neither of them had words for yet but both of them seemed increasingly reluctant to walk away from. What neither of them knew, as they sat together in the flickering candlelight of the East Tower those quiet mornings, was that far beyond Blackthorn's borders, in territory long considered hostile and silent, an old name was beginning to stir once more, drawn by rumors carried on trade routes and traveling merchants, rumors of a king whose curse had somehow, impossibly, begun to loosen its grip. Autumn settled over Blackthorn territory with a golden hush, the forest surrounding the fortress turning shades of amber and rust that reminded Ren, more than once, of a particular pair of eyes she had grown increasingly fond of watching. 2 months had passed since she first knelt on the cold stone floor of the East Tower, and in that time something quiet and steady had grown between herself and Cale, something neither of them had named aloud, but both of them seemed to understand without needing words. Their mornings after a shift had become a kind of ritual. Ren would bring warm bread and tea from the kitchens, and they would sit together near the window as the sun rose, talking about anything and everything, or sometimes simply sitting in comfortable silence, content with each other's presence. Cale spoke, slowly at first and then with growing ease, about the pressures of ruling a pack that both depended on him and feared him in equal measure. Ren spoke about growing up without parents, about Talia's kindness in taking her in, about the strange comfort of belonging somewhere even when that belonging came without blood ties. It was on one such morning, golden light spilling across the stone floor of his study, where they had taken to sharing breakfast, that Cale set down his cup and looked at her with an expression she had not quite seen before, careful and searching. "I want to show you something," he said, "if you're willing." Curious, Ren followed him down a narrow staircase she had never noticed before, tucked behind a tapestry near his study, descending into a part of the fortress that felt older, colder, untouched by the daily bustle of pack life above. At the bottom, a small chamber held nothing but a single stone altar and a collection of old, weathered scrolls protected behind glass. "This is where the record of my family's curse is kept," Cale said quietly. "Only the ruling Alpha and the eldest council member are permitted to view it. I have never shown it to anyone else." Ren's heart quickened, understanding the weight of what he was offering her. "Why show me now?" Cale was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the ancient scrolls. "Because I find that I no longer wish to carry this alone. And because," he added, turning to face her fully, "I have come to trust you with far more than I ever expected to trust anyone." He carefully lifted one of the scrolls, unrolling it with practiced gentleness to reveal faded script in a language Ren did not recognize, alongside a rough illustration of two wolves, one dark and one pale, facing each other across a jagged line that might have represented a border or a battlefield. "3 generations ago," Cale began, "my great-grandfather ruled Blackthorn during a time of uneasy peace with a neighboring pack called Duskmoor. The peace was fragile, held together by a promised alliance between the two packs, sealed through a marriage between my great-grandfather's younger brother and a woman of considerable standing among the Duskmoor pack, a woman said to carry old magic in her blood, passed down from a line of powerful witches who had long served as advisors and healers to that pack." "What happened?" Ren asked softly. "The marriage was called off, suddenly, and without proper explanation given to the Duskmoor pack. My great-grandfather's brother chose another instead, a woman from within Blackthorn itself, leaving the Duskmoor woman humiliated before her entire pack." Cale's expression darkened. The woman's family considered it an unforgivable insult, a betrayal not just of a promise, but of an alliance that had cost them dearly to arrange. In her grief and fury, the woman is said to have cursed the entire Blackthorn bloodline, declaring that every future Alpha would carry a beast within them more dangerous than any natural wolf, a beast that could never be fully controlled, as punishment for the broken promise and the shame inflicted upon her family. Ren stared at the illustration, at the two wolves separated by that jagged line, and the curse has passed down ever since. "Every Alpha since that day has carried some version of it," Cale confirmed, "though the severity has varied. My father's shift was manageable, requiring only modest restraint during the full moon. Mine has grown far worse, uncontrollable by nearly any means, as though the curse itself has been building in strength across the generations, waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" Cale shook his head slowly. "The scrolls do not say, only that the curse was meant to last until some manner of debt was repaid, though what debt, or to whom, has been lost to time. My father searched for answers his entire reign and found none. I confess I had nearly given up hope of ever finding a resolution myself." Ren looked back at the illustration, something uneasy stirring in the back of her mind, a half-formed thought she could not quite grasp. "What was her name? The woman who cursed your family?" Cale frowned, tracing a finger along the faded script until he found the passage he sought. "The scrolls record her only as the Duskmoor witch, though there is a family name mentioned once, in passing, among the lesser details of the broken alliance." He squinted at the ancient script. "Calloway." The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Ren felt the blood drain from her face. "That's my name." Cale's head snapped up, amber eyes wide with sudden dawning realization. "Calloway is not an uncommon name," he said quickly, though his voice had gone tight with tension. "It could easily be coincidence." Could it? Ren's mind raced, pulling together fragments of memory she had never thought to examine closely before. Talia had once mentioned, in passing, that Ren's parents had come from territory far to the north before settling near Blackthorn, territory that bordered old Duskmoor lands before that pack scattered and vanished generations ago. She had never known her parents, never learned any details of her lineage beyond the barest facts, having been orphaned as an infant when illness swept through the traveling group she'd been born into. "I don't know anything about my family," she admitted, her voice unsteady. "Talia found me abandoned near the northern border when I was only a few months old. I never questioned where I came from, I never had reason to." Cale set down the scroll carefully, his expression a complicated mixture of concern and something else, something almost like hope, fragile and uncertain. If you are descended from the very woman who placed this curse upon my bloodline, he said slowly, then perhaps that explains what has happened these past 2 months. Perhaps it explains why the beast responds to you as he does, why your touch alone has managed what no weapon or restraint ever could. You think I might be able to break it, Ren said, understanding dawning alongside a fresh wave of fear. You think that's why none of this feels ordinary, why he calms for me and no one else? I think, Kale said carefully, that I do not yet know what to think. But I know that whatever connection exists between you and this curse, whatever thread of old magic runs through your blood, it has already changed something that 5 years of desperate searching never managed to change, and I find myself both hopeful and terrified of what that might mean. Ren stared down at the illustration of the 2 wolves, one dark and one pale, separated by that ancient jagged line, and felt, for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn as a healer's apprentice, the full weight of a destiny she had never asked for settling heavily upon her shoulders. Whatever this means, she said finally, reaching out to take Kale's hand in her own, feeling him tense with surprise before his fingers curled gently around hers. We'll find out together. I'm not running from this, not from the curse, and not from you. Kale looked down at their joined hands, something fierce and grateful flickering across his tired features, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, standing together in that cold stone chamber beneath the weight of a history neither had chosen but both now shared. News of the discovery could not be kept entirely secret, not within a fortress where whispers traveled faster than any messenger could ride. Within days, Elder Garrick and Elder Marin had both been informed, summoned to the hidden chamber beneath Kale's study, to examine the scrolls for themselves, their expressions grave as they studied the faded script and the illustration of the 2 divided wolves. This changes everything, Marin said, her earlier suspicion of Ren transforming into something closer to wary fascination. If the girl truly carries Duskmoor blood tied directly to the curse itself, then her presence here is no mere coincidence. The old magics often work this way, weaving threads across generations until the right hands are finally in place to either tighten the knot or loosen it. Can it be loosened? Kale asked, his voice tight with a hope he seemed almost afraid to acknowledge. Garrick studied the scrolls carefully, his weathered brow furrowed in concentration. Curses of this nature, born from betrayal and grief, typically require some manner of restoration to be broken, a debt repaid, in whatever form the original wound demands. The scrolls do not specify precisely what that repayment might entail, but if young Ren here truly descends from the woman who cast the curse, her willing presence, her chosen kindness toward the very bloodline that wronged her ancestor, may already be working toward that restoration. You're saying my simply being kind to him might be undoing something my ancestor deliberately built to last generations? Ren asked, struggling to fully grasp the implications. I am saying it is possible, Garrick replied carefully. Old magic often responds to intention as much as action. If the curse was born from betrayal and broken trust, then perhaps it can only be undone through genuine trust freely given. Exactly the kind you have shown these past months without any knowledge of your lineage or its significance. The weight of this settled heavily over the small chamber. Ren looked to Kale, searching his expression for some indication of how he felt about this new revelation, this suggestion that their growing closeness might carry consequences far beyond the 2 of them. There is something else you should know, Marin added, her voice dropping lower, more cautious. If word of this reaches beyond Blackthorn's borders, particularly toward the scattered remnants of the old Duskmoor pack, it may draw unwanted attention. Some among those remnants have never forgotten the humiliation of that broken alliance. If they learn that a Calloway descendant now walks freely within Blackthorn walls, tending to the very curse her ancestor created, their response may not be one of celebration. You think they might see me as a traitor to that old grievance, Ren said slowly, for helping the family that wronged us. I think, Marin said carefully, that old wounds rarely heal simply because time has passed. Some among the Duskmoor remnants have spent generations nursing that humiliation, passing the story down as justification for whatever grievances they continue to hold against Blackthorn. Your presence here, your growing bond with the king himself, may be seen by some as either a betrayal of your own bloodline or an opportunity too valuable to ignore. Kale's jaw tightened, protective instinct flaring visibly across his features. Then we ensure word does not spread beyond these walls. The fewer who know of Ren's lineage, the safer she remains. Fortresses have thin walls when it comes to secrets, my king, Garrick said gently. You know this better than anyone. I will do what I can to encourage discretion among those who already know, but I cannot promise the knowledge will remain contained forever. That evening, as Ren made her way toward the East Tower for her nightly watch, She found herself more unsettled than she had been in weeks. The comfortable rhythm she had built with Cale now shadowed by the weight of ancient grievances and uncertain danger. She found him waiting in his study rather than the chamber, staring into the fire with an expression of deep concentration. "You're troubled," she observed, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I am wondering," Cale admitted, "whether I have been selfish these past months. Whether in allowing myself to grow close to you, I have unknowingly placed you directly in the path of danger neither of us fully understood until today." "You didn't force anything upon me," Ren said firmly. "Every choice I've made, from that first night in the chamber to every morning since, has been mine alone. I don't regret any of it, curse or no curse, danger or no danger." Cale looked up at her, something fierce and vulnerable warring behind his amber eyes. "Even knowing now that ancient enemies may seek you out because of what runs in your blood?" "Especially knowing that," Ren said. "Because it means whatever is happening between us matters. It means the connection I feel toward you, toward even the part of you that everyone else fears, isn't some accident or coincidence. It's something old and significant, something worth protecting rather than running from." Cale rose from his desk and crossed the room to kneel before her chair, taking her hands gently in his own, his expression achingly earnest. "I have spent 5 years believing myself cursed beyond redemption, destined to rule alone, feared by my own pack, incapable of the kind of connection other alphas take for granted. And then you arrived, Ren Calloway, with your steady hands and your fearless heart, and you have made me believe, for the first time since this curse took hold, that perhaps redemption is possible after all." "Cale," Ren whispered, her heart pounding at the raw honesty in his voice. "I do not know what the coming days will bring," he continued. "I do not know if old enemies will truly come seeking you, or whether this curse can be broken at all, or what price such breaking might demand of either of us. But I know that whatever comes, I would rather face it with you beside me, than continue living the half-life I have known these past 5 years, safe perhaps, but entirely alone." Ren leaned forward, closing the small remaining distance between them, and pressed her lips gently to his in a kiss that felt like both a promise and a beginning, the culmination of weeks of careful glances and quiet mornings and growing trust finally given voice. Cale responded immediately, one hand rising to cradle her face with a tenderness that belied the fierce strength she knew he carried within him, both in human form and in the other shape that had somehow, impossibly, become as familiar and dear to her as his own. When they finally parted, breathless, foreheads resting together, Cale murmured softly against her lips, "Whatever comes, Ren, we face it together. That much I promise you." Neither of them could have known, in that quiet, golden moment of new beginning, that the very enemies Marin had warned of were already gathering along Blackthorn's distant borders, drawn by whispers of a Calloway descendant living within the walls of their oldest rival, preparing to reclaim what they believed had always belonged to them. The days following that quiet confession between Ren and Cale passed in a strange, fragile peace, the kind that feels almost too good to trust. Word of their growing bond spread through the fortress much as word of Ren's unusual gift had spread months before, though this time the reactions were more mixed, some among the pack pleased to see their king finally finding some measure of happiness, others still wary of what her presence might mean for the future of Blackthorn's bloodline. Ren spent her mornings now not only sharing breakfast with Cale but also poring over the ancient scrolls alongside Elder Garrick, searching for any additional detail that might illuminate the full history of the curse and its origins. It was during one such morning, dust motes drifting lazily through slanted sunlight in the hidden chamber, that Garrick uncovered a passage neither of them had noticed before, tucked into the margin of the oldest scroll in faded, cramped handwriting. "Here," Garrick said, adjusting his spectacles as he squinted at the text. "This appears to be a personal note, added by the Duskmoor Witch herself, separate from the formal curse recorded above it." Ren leaned closer, her pulse quickening. "What does it say?" Garrick translated slowly, working through the archaic phrasing with careful deliberation. "It reads, as best I can determine, this curse I bind not from hatred alone, but from a broken heart that trusted too freely and was cast aside without cause. Should my bloodline ever choose, of its own free will, to offer the trust that was once stolen from me, let that offering be weighed as true repayment, and let the beast within finally rest." The chamber fell silent as the weight of those words settled over them. "She wasn't only cursing them," Ren said slowly, understanding dawning with painful clarity. "She was leaving a way back, a path to forgiveness, even in her grief." "It would seem so," Garrick agreed, his expression thoughtful. "Which suggests that the trust you have freely given Cale, and the trust he has offered you in return, may indeed be exactly the repayment this curse was always meant to require." Not a debt of gold or land or apology, but simply the honest trust that was denied to her all those generations ago. Then why hasn't it broken already? Ren asked. We've trusted each other for weeks now. Longer, if you count how quickly the beast calmed for me that very first night. Garrick studied the passage again, his brow furrowed. Perhaps trust alone is not quite sufficient. Perhaps it requires trust acknowledged openly, declared rather than simply felt privately between the two of you. Curses of this nature often demand a kind of witnessing, a moment where the truth is spoken aloud before others, not simply understood quietly in private. Before Ren could respond, hurried footsteps echoed on the stairs leading down to the hidden chamber, and moments later, Finch appeared in the doorway, breathless and pale, his young face etched with alarm. "My king," he said, "Elder Merrin sent me. Riders have been spotted along the northern border. Unfamiliar riders, flying no banner, but moving with clear purpose toward Blackthorn territory." Cale rose immediately, his easy warmth from moments before replaced entirely by the sharp, commanding presence of a king preparing for potential conflict. "How many? A dozen, perhaps more." The border scouts could not get close enough to count precisely before the riders retreated back into the tree line. "Send word to double the watch along the northern wall," Cale ordered, "and summon the full council. If these are Duskmoor remnants testing our defenses, I want to be prepared before they make any further move." Finch nodded and hurried away, and Cale turned back to Ren, his expression grim. "It seems Merrin's warning has come to pass rather more quickly than any of us anticipated." "We knew this was possible," Ren said, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the fear tightening in her chest. "We knew there might be a price for what's been happening between us. Knowing it was possible, and watching it actually unfold outside our walls are two very different experiences," Cale said, reaching out to grip her hand tightly. "I need you to understand something, Ren. If these riders do represent Duskmoor's remaining pack, and if they have learned of your lineage, they may attempt to take you, believing you belong to them by blood rather than to Blackthorn by choice. I won't be taken anywhere against my will," Ren said firmly. "And I certainly won't abandon what we've built here out of fear of old grudges that have nothing to do with either of us personally." Cale's expression softened, even as worry remained etched deep in the lines around his eyes. "That fierce heart of yours is precisely what drew me to you in the first place. But please, promise me you will exercise caution over these coming days. Stay close to the fortress. Avoid traveling alone beyond the walls, even for gathering herbs." "I promise," Ren said, though something in her chest tightened uncomfortably at the thought of confinement, however reasonable the precaution might be. The council meeting that afternoon stretched long into the evening, elders and senior guards debating the appropriate response to the mysterious riders, some advocating for an immediate show of force along the border, others urging patience and careful observation before any action was taken. Ren sat quietly near the back of the council chamber, listening, absorbing every detail, aware of the weight of stairs occasionally drifting her way, as elders considered, perhaps for the first time fully, the potential danger her presence had introduced to Blackthorn's careful peace. It was Garrick who finally spoke the thought Ren suspected many in the chamber were already considering. If these riders do represent Duskmoor's interest in reclaiming what they believe rightfully theirs, our best defense may not be walls or weapons at all. It may be the very thing we have been discussing all morning. If Ren's presence here, freely trusted and freely trusting in return, is indeed capable of breaking the curse entirely, then perhaps our swiftest path to safety lies in seeing that resolution through to its completion, before Duskmoor's remnants have any further opportunity to interfere. All eyes turned toward Ren and Cale, seated together near the head of the council table, and Ren felt the full weight of expectation settle over her shoulders, heavier than anything she had carried since first walking into that iron chamber all those months ago. "What exactly are you suggesting, Elder Garrick?" Cale asked carefully. "I am suggesting," Garrick said, "that the two of you may need to declare your trust for one another openly, before this full council, and before the pack at large, precisely as the ancient passage described. Not as a private understanding between yourselves, but as a witnessed truth, spoken aloud for all to hear. If the old magic responds as I believe it might, such a declaration could break the curse entirely, removing the very danger that draws Duskmoor's remnants toward our borders in the first place." Ren looked at Cale, searching his expression, and found there not hesitation but a quiet, steady resolve that mirrored her own growing certainty. "Then let us not wait," Cale said, rising from his seat, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed council chamber. "Gather the pack, let us see this curse broken before another sunset, and let Duskmoor's remnants learn that whatever grievance they still carry, they will find no easy prize waiting within these walls." Word spread through Blackthorn Fortress like fire through dry grass. By the time evening torches were lit along the Great Hall, nearly the entire pack had gathered, filling every available space along the stone walls, spilling out into the courtyard beyond the open doors. Ren had never seen so many faces turned in a single direction, and the weight of their collective attention pressed against her chest like a physical thing. She stood beside Kael at the front of the Great Hall, Elder Garrick and Elder Marin flanking them on either side, the ancient scroll bearing the ancestral curse displayed on a stand between them for all to witness. Ren's hands trembled slightly, though whether from fear or anticipation, she could no longer clearly distinguish. "Members of Blackthorn," Kael began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed hall, the same commanding presence Ren had first glimpsed months ago now fully restored, though softened now by something gentler beneath it. "Many of you know the burden my bloodline has carried these 5 years past, the curse that has made me a danger to those I swore to protect. Tonight, we believe that burden may finally be lifted." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a mixture of hope and skepticism evident on the many faces watching. "Elder Garrick has uncovered the true nature of this curse," Kael continued, "placed upon my family generations ago by a Duskmoor woman whose trust was betrayed, whose heart was broken by a promise unkept. She bound this curse not from simple hatred, but with a path toward its own undoing, should her bloodline ever choose freely to offer the trust once stolen from her." He turned then to look directly at Ren, and something in his expression made her breath catch despite the hundreds of eyes watching them both. "That bloodline stands here beside me tonight," Kael said, his voice carrying clear conviction. "Ren Calloway, Healer's apprentice, descendant of the very woman whose broken heart bound this curse into being. And in these past months, without knowledge of her lineage, without any obligation beyond simple kindness, she has offered me something no one else in 5 long years has managed to offer. Trust, freely given, without fear, without calculation, without demand for anything in return." Ren felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes as she stepped forward, turning to face the assembled pack, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I did not know, when I first knelt beside the creature everyone feared, that I carried the very blood of the woman who cursed him," she said. "I only knew that something in his eyes did not match the stories whispered about him. I saw shame where others saw savagery. I saw loneliness where others saw only danger. And in the months since, I have come to know the man beneath that curse, and I have chosen, freely and completely, to trust him with everything I am." She turned back to face Kael, reaching for his hands, holding them steady in her own before the entire gathered pack. "I trust you, Kael Ashgrove," she said clearly, her voice ringing through the silent hall. "Not because of any curse or destiny, but because you have shown me, again and again, that the man beneath the fear the pack has carried for 5 years is worthy of trust freely given." Kael's amber eyes shone bright with unshed emotion as he lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles before speaking his own declaration, loud enough for every soul in the Great Hall to hear. "And I trust you in return, Ren Calloway," he said. "With my life, with the future of this pack, with whatever remains of the man I am beneath whatever shape this curse forces upon me, I trust you completely, freely, without reservation." For a long moment, nothing happened. The Great Hall remained silent, hundreds of held breaths waiting for some sign, some indication that the ancient magic had heard their declaration and responded. Then Kael gasped, doubling over slightly as though struck by some invisible force, his hands releasing Ren's as he pressed them instead against his own chest. Ren rushed to steady him, panic flaring bright and sudden, but before she could speak, a strange golden light began to emanate from beneath his skin, faint at first, then growing steadily brighter, visible even through the fabric of his tunic. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the golden light intensified, wrapping around Kael's entire form in a shimmering, pulsing glow that illuminated the Great Hall like a second sunrise. Ren stepped back, watching in awe and fear as the light seemed to draw something dark and heavy up from deep within him, a shadow that had clung to his very bones for 5 long years, now finally being pulled free. The shadow took shape briefly in the air above him, the rough silhouette of a massive wolf, before dissolving entirely into wisps of smoke that scattered and vanished into the rafters above. The golden light followed soon after, fading slowly, until only Kael remained, standing upright once more, breathing hard, his expression stunned. "Kael?" Ren asked softly, reaching for him again. "Are you?" She never finished the question, because in that moment, Kael's entire posture shifted, straightening with a lightness she had never seen in him before. The perpetual weariness that had lined his features for as long as she had known him suddenly, remarkably absent. It's gone, he said, his voice filled with wonder. Ren, I can feel it. The curse. It's actually gone. The great hall erupted into stunned murmurs, then gradually into cheers, the assembled pack witnessing something none of them had ever dared hope to see. Elder Garrick stepped forward, his weathered face split with a rare, wide smile, examining Cale carefully, as though searching for any remaining sign of the affliction that had plagued him for 5 years. Try it, Garrick urged. Call the shift. See what remains. Cale closed his eyes, concentrating, and Ren watched as his form shifted smoothly, controlled and deliberate, into the same massive wolf shape she had first tended in that cold stone chamber. But this time, there was no wildness in his amber eyes, no barely restrained violence in his posture. He stood calm and steady, clearly himself even in this other shape, and when he shifted back moments later, he was laughing, actually laughing, the sound rich and full and entirely free of the burden he had carried for so long. I'm free, he said, pulling Ren into his arms as the gathered pack cheered around them. For the first time in 5 years, I am truly free. But even as celebration swept through the great hall, even as elders and guards alike pressed forward to offer congratulations and disbelieving joy, Ren caught sight of a messenger pushing through the crowd near the entrance, his expression grim, urgency written across every hurried step as he made his way toward Elder Merrin. Whatever news he carried, Ren sensed immediately, was not going to allow their celebration to last very long. The messenger's news cut through the celebration like a blade through silk. Elder Merrin's face drained of color as she listened to his hurried report, and moments later she raised a hand, calling for silence across the great hall. The Northern Riders have made contact, she announced, her voice carrying grave weight through the crowd. They have sent word demanding an audience, claiming ancestral right to reclaim what they call their lost daughter, referring directly to Ren Calloway. Cale's arm tightened protectively around Ren's shoulders. How did they learn of her so quickly? It matters little now how they learned, Merrin said grimly. What matters is they stand less than a day's ride from our borders, and they have made clear they will not leave without her. Ren felt the warmth of the evening's celebration drain away, replaced by cold, familiar fear. What do they want with me exactly? The messenger, a young scout still catching his breath from his hard ride, stepped forward hesitantly. Their leader claims you as rightful Duskmore blood, my lady. He says the old pack has scattered and weakened over generations, and that reclaiming a descendant of their most powerful bloodline would restore strength and standing they have long since lost. He does not intend you harm, or so he claims, only to bring you back to what he calls your true home. This is my home, Ren said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. I have no memory of Duskmore, no connection to whatever remains of that pack beyond blood I never knew I carried until mere days ago. Blood matters a great deal to packs desperate to rebuild their strength, Garrick said quietly. I fear they will not simply accept your refusal, however genuine. Cale's expression had hardened into something Ren had not seen since that very first night in the East Tower, a fierce protectiveness that radiated from every line of his newly unburdened form. They will have to go through me and every guard within these walls before they take her anywhere against her will. My king, Merrin said carefully. The curse may be broken, but Blackthorn's guard remains modest compared to what Duskmore's remnants may have gathered. If they have spent years quietly rebuilding strength while nursing old grievances, a direct confrontation carries real risk. The council convened once more, this time with far less celebration and far more tension, debating long into the night how best to respond to Duskmore's demand. Some argued for immediate refusal and preparation for potential conflict. Others urged caution, suggesting negotiation might avoid bloodshed altogether. Through it all, Ren sat quietly, turning the situation over in her mind, searching for some path forward that did not require others to risk everything on her behalf. It was well past midnight when she finally slipped away from the council chamber, seeking the quiet of the East Tower, the chamber that had become so significant to her these past months. She found Cale waiting there when she arrived, having followed her without a word. You're thinking of doing something reckless, he said, watching her carefully. I'm thinking, Ren admitted, that perhaps I should go to them myself, speak with their leader directly. Explain that I have chosen my home, that I have no wish to be reclaimed by a pack I've never known, and perhaps convince them to withdraw peacefully, rather than risk conflict neither side truly wants. Absolutely not, Cale said immediately, his voice sharp with alarm. Ren, you have no idea what kind of reception you might receive. They may not honor whatever peaceful intentions they claim once you are actually standing before them, vulnerable and alone. I wouldn't be entirely alone, Ren said. You could accompany me, as could Garrick, as could a modest guard. Not enough to appear as a threat, but enough to ensure I am not entirely defenseless. And if they simply take you regardless of any guard present, if this is merely a pretext for confrontation rather than genuine negotiation. Ren reached for his hands, holding them steady despite her own racing heart. Then at least we will know we tried the path of peace before resorting to anything more dangerous. Kale, I spent my whole life without a pack of my own, without family, without any sense of belonging beyond what Talia and Blackthorn gave me freely. I will not now allow strangers to claim me simply because blood runs in a particular direction. But I also do not wish for war to break out over my presence here, not when there may yet be a chance to resolve this peacefully. Kale studied her for a long moment, conflict evident in every line of his expression, before finally, reluctantly, nodding. If you insist on this path, I insist on accompanying you myself, alongside whatever guard Garrick deems appropriate. I will not send you into potential danger while I remain safely behind these walls. I wouldn't have it any other way, Ren said softly. They departed at dawn, a small party consisting of Ren, Kale, Garrick, and 6 of Blackthorn's most trusted guards, riding north through the golden autumn forest, toward the border where Duskmoor's remnants had made camp. The ride passed largely in tense silence, each member of the party lost in private thoughts about what awaited them. They found the Duskmoor camp exactly where the scouts had indicated, a modest but well-organized gathering of perhaps 24 riders, their leader a tall, severe-looking man with graying hair and sharp eyes that fixed immediately on Ren as their party approached. "You must be the Calloway girl," he said without preamble, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I am Corwin. What remains of Duskmoor's leadership? I had expected Blackthorn to refuse our request entirely, yet here you stand, seemingly of your own accord." "I came to speak with you directly," Ren said, steadying her voice despite her nerves. "Not because Blackthorn compelled me, but because I wish to explain my position myself, honestly and without intermediaries." Corwin's expression remained unreadable. "Then speak, girl. Explain why Duskmoor blood chooses to remain among those who wronged your ancestor generations past." "Because Blackthorn is the only home I have ever known," Ren said clearly, holding his gaze steadily despite every instinct urging her to look away. "I did not know of my lineage until mere days ago. I have no memory of Duskmoor, no connection to your pack beyond blood I never knew existed. What I do have is a life I have built, people I have grown to love, and a purpose I have found in healing rather than in ancient grievances that predate my own birth by generations." "The curse," Corwin said slowly, his sharp eyes narrowing. "I have heard whispers it is broken. Is this true?" "It is true," Kale confirmed, stepping forward beside Ren. "Broken through freely offered trust, exactly as your ancestors' original binding intended. The debt she demanded has been repaid, not through gold or land, but through the very trust she once had stolen from her." For a long, tense moment, Corwin studied them both, his expression giving nothing away. Then, slowly, something in his rigid posture eased slightly. "My own grandmother spoke of that broken alliance until her dying breath, the humiliation never fully healing within our scattered pack. If what you say is true, if the curse has truly ended through honest repayment, rather than force or manipulation, then perhaps—" He paused, considering carefully. "Perhaps the debt between our peoples has finally been settled, in a manner even my grandmother might have found acceptable." Ren felt hope kindle cautiously in her chest. "Then you'll withdraw peacefully, without further conflict?" Corwin studied her for one final, searching moment. "I will need proof, girl. Proof that this curse has truly broken, witnessed with my own eyes, before I can carry such news back to what remains of our scattered pack, and convince them this old grievance is finally truly resolved." Kale did not hesitate. He stepped forward into the open space between the two gathered parties, and beneath the pale morning sun, he closed his eyes and allowed the shift to take him, the transformation smooth and controlled, utterly unlike the violent, unpredictable changes that had plagued him for 5 long years. The massive wolf that emerged bore the same charcoal fur threaded with silver, the same striking amber eyes, but the wildness that had once made grown guards flinch was entirely absent. He stood calm and steady, his posture relaxed, his gaze clear and present, watching Corwin with the same quiet intelligence he carried in his human form. Gasps rippled through the assembled Duskmoor riders. Corwin himself took a slow step forward, studying the massive creature with something approaching wonder. "May I?" Corwin asked quietly, extending a hand tentatively toward the great wolf's head. Kale dipped his head slightly in permission, and Corwin's weathered hand came to rest gently against the thick fur, searching perhaps for some remaining trace of the violence generations of stories had promised him. He found none. Only calm, steady breathing, and eyes that held no threat whatsoever. "Remarkable," Corwin murmured, withdrawing his hand slowly. He turned back to face Ren, something in his severe expression finally softening. My grandmother would have wept to see this day, I think. Whatever grief drove her to bind this curse, whatever anger she carried to her own grave unresolved, it seems her original intention has finally been honored after all this time. Cale shifted back to his human form, and Garrick stepped forward with a cloak to offer him, which he accepted gratefully before turning back to face Corwin directly. Your grandmother left a path toward forgiveness within the very curse she bound, Cale said. I believe, in the end, she wished for healing more than she wished for endless punishment. Perhaps that wish can finally be honored between our two peoples as well, not merely between Ren and myself. Corwin considered this for a long moment, his sharp eyes moving between Cale and Ren, weighing something Ren could not quite read. Finally, he extended his hand toward Cale in a gesture of cautious peace. Duskmore has scattered and weakened over these long generations, King Cale Ashgrove. Perhaps there is opportunity here beyond simple resolution of an old grievance. Perhaps there is opportunity for genuine alliance, the kind our peoples once nearly achieved before betrayal tore it apart. Cale clasped Corwin's offered hand firmly. Blackthorn would welcome such alliance, freely and honestly offered, exactly as the trust that broke this curse was freely and honestly given. As the two leaders spoke further, beginning the careful work of rebuilding trust between two peoples separated by generations of grievance, Ren felt a hand slip into her own. She turned to find Cale beside her, his amber eyes warm with something that looked remarkably like pure, uncomplicated happiness. You did this, he said softly, for her ears alone. Your courage in coming here, in speaking honestly rather than hiding behind walls and guards, may have accomplished more today than 5 years of my own careful diplomacy ever managed. We did this, Ren corrected gently. Together. Exactly as you promised that evening in your study. They rode back to Blackthorn Fortress that afternoon, alongside a small delegation from Duskmore, Corwin himself agreeing to accompany them to begin formal discussions of renewed alliance between the two packs. The autumn sun cast long golden shadows across the forest path, and for the first time since this entire journey began, Ren felt the tight knot of fear that had lived in her chest for weeks finally begin to loosen. That evening, as celebration once again filled the great hall of Blackthorn Fortress, this time joined by unexpected guests from a pack long considered lost to old grievance, Cale drew Ren aside to the same window in his study, where they had first shared quiet mornings together. I have spent 5 years believing myself destined for a solitary reign, he said, watching the golden light of sunset paint the forest beyond the window. Feared by my own pack, isolated by a curse I could not explain, resigned to ruling alone, until whatever heir might someday inherit both my throne and my affliction. And now? Ren asked softly. Now, Cale said, turning to face her fully, I find myself free of that affliction, standing beside a woman whose courage and kindness accomplished what 5 years of desperate searching never could, watching old enemies become potential allies through nothing more than honest trust freely given. He reached for her hands, holding them gently. Ren Calloway, I do not wish to simply return to the life I knew before you arrived. I wish to build something new, something neither of us has ever truly had. A home, freely chosen. A partnership, freely offered. A future, built on exactly the kind of trust that broke this ancient curse in the first place. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Ren said, her heart pounding with hope and joy in equal measure. I am asking you to remain by my side, Cale said, not simply as the woman who broke my curse, but as my equal, my partner, and if you are willing, eventually my wife. To rule Blackthorn together, to welcome whatever alliance grows between our people and Duskmore's remnants together, to build the kind of home neither of us ever fully had until we found each other. Ren felt tears of pure happiness gather in her eyes as she nodded, unable to find words adequate to the moment, and instead simply pulled him close, sealing her answer in a kiss that carried within it every quiet morning they had shared, every fear faced together, every trust freely given across these transformative months. Below them, in the great hall, the pack that had once feared the very sound of a beast's roar in the night now celebrated a king finally free of his ancient burden, a healer's apprentice who had accomplished what generations of desperate searching never managed, and the tentative beginning of peace between two peoples long divided by grief and grievance. The beast that everyone once feared no longer existed, not truly. In his place stood simply Cale, a man finally whole, finally free, standing beside the one person who had never once needed him to be anything other than exactly what he was, monster and man both, worthy of trust, worthy of kindness, and worthy, at long last, of love freely and completely given. Outside, the full moon rose steadily over Blackthorn Fortress, its silver light bathing the ancient stones in gentle radiance, no longer a herald of dread and violence, but simply a moon, beautiful and calm, shining over a kingdom finally at peace.